guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the CX Chronicles Podcast. Super excited for today's guest, guys. Ken Peterson from QuestionPro is joining us. Ken, why don't you say hello to the CX Nation?
Hey, everyone. Or should I say aloha?
Aloha. Ken's joining us from Hawaii today, guys. So for those of you that are listening to the podcast, you'll see that Ken has got the beach in his background. So for those of you that are watching on the YouTube channel, you'll actually be able to see that. I just told Ken I'm sitting in Buffalo where we're expecting 3 to 6 feet of snow. Ken's sitting on the beach in Hawaii, and I told him I kind of wish that I was on an airplane heading towards him right now to have this conversation.
Well, and good CX would have you down here, showing you the ropes, shall we say, and talking about the 3 to 4 foot swells that we're going to have with the wave.
That sounds way better than the blizzard of 2022 in Buffalo, Ken. But Ken, thanks for joining us, man. I'd love for you to kick off the show like we kick off all these episodes. Take a couple minutes to set the stage for the listeners, Ken. You have this incredible customer-focused business leader background. You've worked at all of these incredible companies across the world, and you've had all these incredible positions. Why don't you take a few minutes to kind of share your story and talk about some of the stepping stones that you really were able to, have the privilege of having early in your career, and then definitely tell us how you landed where you are today as the president of CX at QuestionPro.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've probably taken, like most people, no one wakes up when they're 7 years old and says, wow, I want to be a future CX leader. No, mine was, I was actually not a great student. I mean, I got good grades. I just didn't like that whole school thing going, having to wake up and go like most teenagers didn't want to wake up in the morning. But somehow thought I was going to be a teacher someday, despite that. So went out, got a teaching degree in mathematics, secondary education, taught for about a year. Didn't really enjoy that. Worked in retail for better part of a decade. I managed, my graduate degree is in operations research management sciences. So I was managing, sales forecasts, product planning. And I always say, I sort of jokingly tell it, but it was a true story. They'd come around with the market research reports every quarter. And they were in these big, thick binders, I know, a long time ago. And I'd always put it right on the shelf, right up on my desk, so that when a manager would come around and say, have you seen the latest market research reports? I'd say, yeah, they're right here. And I didn't even have to leave my seat. I could just point to it, and never really read them because I was only concerned with the numbers behind the operation. I wasn't concerned with, how someone felt about them, whatever. I did labor planning, things like that. Didn't need the emotional side of it. Friend of mine said, I need your help. I want you to come work for me. He worked for a market research firm, and he needed help sort of getting reports out the door, basically. It was an operational issue. It had nothing, I knew nothing about market research. But he said, I need your help getting these reports out the door. You're the right person for it. You know the technology. You can help us speed up this process. They were taking 6 weeks to get 45 reports out the door on a quarterly basis. And it doesn't take long to figure out that, you're giving people data, 2.5, 3 months, 4 months after the first data point is collected. And this was all customer experience work. They called it CSAT at the time, but, so I joined them. I figured I was going to do that for 2 years and then move back out to Colorado. And I joined, and within, the first quarter, we had the reports out the door within a week. And I wasn't even happy with that. And they upped the number of reports to like 1,100 per month. And I was like, all right, challenge accepted. Yeah, so I went ahead. I'll never say it was the first, but, it was one of those first web reporting portals that I just, all I cared about was getting the numbers from the data centers. Yep. And pushing it into, pushed it into SQL, and the SQL rewrote the website every 6 hours, and the website crashed every 6 hours because as I'm loading the numbers, every one of these 1,100 managers was like, it's time to log in and see what's going on. But yeah, I started there, and I was completely operational. And when I decided to move, they said, I'm a revolutionary in this sense. 22 years ago, when I moved back to Colorado, they said, why don't we let you work remotely? Because we need you. So
nice.
I started working
doing the remote game for a long time, Ken.
Yeah, I was going to do this for 2 years and be done, and then find, something else to do in Colorado, a new adventure. And the more I got involved, the more I really liked it. And I like to, I started to see, the flip side of it, the part that you have to have with the empathy and things like that. So, tying, just putting numbers against a spreadsheet and saying, this is what, this is our plan, there's a whole nother emotional element that I got to see. And so over the years, I got to work with some of the biggest and some of the best clients. I mean, just, if you think of the Fortune 50, I probably worked with
That's awesome.
48 of them probably.
Yeah,
And,
wow.
so spent a lot of time there, and my career transitioned into deploying these technology systems as
Yep.
technology improved. I worked with the big names, including QuestionPro, where I eventually joined a few years after that. So
Awesome.
I sort of ended up here, and I was always on the services side of it, and now I'm on the sort of the software side of it. And I like doing it because I get to bring some of that uh, innovation that I always felt was lacking in a lot of the bigger companies. And we're a slightly smaller company, so we can move really fast. And I want to be able to bring that empathy part closer to the numbers part, and make it work for everyone.
I love it. Well, Ken, first of all, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for giving us that background. And it just makes me think about what we were talking about the other day, which is like some of the work that you guys are doing at QuestionPro. And then I certainly want you to be able to kind of give our listeners the high level for who QuestionPro is and some of the things, some of the incredible work that you guys are doing. But like, Ken and I were talking about this the other day, guys, where there's so many businesses out there that think we need custom built feedback solutions, and we need to be able to blast all of these different types of surveys, and we need to be able to see all this different visibility. And then they don't realize that there's so many different solutions, number one, but there's incredible solutions at QuestionPro out there where they've already done this stuff for you. They've already kind of figured out what's going to work. They've figured out different potential paths. They've got different templates. They've got different, methods that work. And then most importantly, they've already got a community of experienced users who can kind of help that path, and they can help business owners and other executive teams with thinking about how they can rinse, wash, and repeat, not build a wheel from scratch. And I think that's one of the really interesting things that I've picked up along our last couple of conversations. That's one of the incredible things you guys are doing with your customers at QuestionPro.
Yeah, and I like to. I mean, there's no. I'm not attempting to shed any negative light on any of our competitors, because I've worked with many of them, and I have friends with all of them, people that I consider good friends even, and they all have their approaches. And I think what I like to bring together is that idea that the customer is going through a journey. They're not hitting one touch point that you can measure and then add 50 questions to that survey. So it is about bringing those little pieces of the business together, because we still talk about, I mean, I remember when web started becoming a dominant force in purchasing, whether it was researching your product, or maybe, hey, I can wait 5 days until it's shipped to me, that kind of thing. There was an element that was always, well, that's the web team and this is the stores team. And they brought some of those pieces together, but they certainly, as organizations, don't view them as the same thing. They still see them as different thing. And so we talk about being able to measure every touch point in the journey, and not having 50 questions about how was your online order. Well, I clicked, I paid, it got here when it got here. I mean, you don't need to ask me how I feel about the organization as a whole. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
Keep it to what's relevant in that touch point. And so we talk about root causes behind everything. And that's the one thing that you can sort of tie together with everything, is those root causes, is being able to bring them in and say, hey, I've got a problem with payments on my payment terminals in a location. I've got problems with payments on my website. I've got problem with payments when I'm doing remote pop-ups. Maybe the common theme is payments. Maybe we need to pull in finance. We need to pull in our controllers. We need to pull in the technology operations and fix that problem, rather than just saying, oh, sorry, every time it goes wrong.
100%. I love that you're immediately jumping into today's podcast talking about the journey, because number one, first of all, it's the easiest way of getting the blueprint, or getting all of the pieces laid out onto a piece of paper, or onto a digital asset where everyone can see all the good, the bad, the ugly, the complexity, right? Just to even see the complexity and see how It's a web of teams, it's a web of tools, it's a web of data, it's a web of actions, it's a web of all these different things. It's super complex, right? That's the first part. But then the other piece too, man, is like I love that you start off with this, and then it'll set us up to jump into a team. But this is another easy way that every company, whether you, to your point, whether you're a small scrappy startup or whether you're a top 50, Fortune 500 global company, you get to see and have a visual sense for how customer experience, customer success, it's a team sport. It is not just on CS individuals. And I love that you called this right out, Ken, which is like, this is where you start to show your marketing folks, your sales folks, people that are putting the leads and the opportunities at the top of the funnel, your onboarding folks, your conversion folks, your account management and your customer retention folks, your DevOps folks, your finance folks. This is where you start to see all the different pieces of the puzzle around, literally every one of us has some ownership around making sure that this journey is incredible. But the other piece too, I say this all the time with our clients at CXC, Ken, you're starting to tee up areas of accountability, responsibility, and authority, right? You're starting to streamline some of the marching orders around who owns what and who's going to have to be a stakeholder, who's going to have to be aware of what's going on, who's going to have decision power, right? And I think it's like a lot of people, man, they might roll their eyes when you start talking about customer journey mapping. Those people have never done it really effectively, and they probably haven't had a partner come in who knows how to do it extremely well to be able to also leverage it as an opportunity to have some really difficult conversations in your business with your team, probably on your leadership team, around how you're going to make those bets and how you're going to make those investments as your business scales in the future.
And I'll say this much: building that first journey map is a painstaking experience.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so worth it, because when you have that map, you can go back to it once a month, once a quarter, even once a year, and say, okay, we see how these things change. And we all think of it as, I've always seen the funnel. Our marketing funnel, our sales funnels nowadays aren't this linear funnel. I mean, there's bouncing all over the place. There's decision points that we never, traditionally we never thought about. But those decision points hey, if I'm a technology buyer, I may come to you and say, hey, I trust your opinion.
Yep.
Give me some information about this company. And you say, oh, well, I never worked with it, so talk this. And now I'm not talking to a friend of mine that knows something about the business. I'm talking to a friend's friend. And then I'm going on to reviews. I mean, reviews are just about as important as, when we were doing our presentation at our conference a couple of weeks back, someone from Google said, yeah, reviews, 90% of people would listen to a review before they would ask a friend.
Wow. Yeah.
If you think about that. So that's so influential on that funnel that now when we look at the funnel, there's so much that we can not control versus what we controlled. I mean, back when there were 3 channels, you pretty much believed what those commercials told you.
Definitely.
And then they had a doctor at the end saying Oreo cookies are good for weight loss.
I wish that was the case, Ken.
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, so one thing that I want to jump on before we dive into team, but is I feel like I'm constantly telling people, your customer reviews or your customer feedback, if leveraged accordingly, it is gold. It's currency. It's modern currency. I literally think it's equally as valuable as money in some cases, because you're right. The modern consumer, they're going to, and let's talk SaaS for our SaaS people, our SaaS listeners. You're going to go to a G2, a Capterra, Gartner first and foremost before you even think about what couple of entities you might reach out to and get into the sales process with. The other thing too is just like, depending on the quality of the reviews and depending on the way that different companies sort of position reviews, man, you can literally start to kind of show people what types of, who's going to be optimal, or right, who your ideal customer profile is, or what your usage is, or maybe even what expectations alignment look like, right? And you can start to almost qualify or disqualify just based on the way that you're asking customers to leave that review or to leave that feedback. And the last thing is put it in public, man. Like I think that companies like Google and Yelp and just so many other industry specific review sites, it's where people start the customer journey. A lot of times when you're thinking about how does somebody become aware of a business or a service or a product in the first place, or how do they even think about considering as an option, they're looking at reviews. They're looking at the first 10 reviews that pop up on the screen in front of them. And that's kind of how they're starting to decide who they're going to put into their short list of opportunities and options for them to start thinking about shopping. So I love that you call that out.
I mean, if you're going to shop somewhere, I mean, if you think when was the last time you opened the yellow pages? No,
It's been a
the
long
first
time.
thing you do is, hey, I need a tire repair shop. What do? You go to Google, you type in tire repair shop near me. It probably
Definitely.
autofills it for you. You press
Yep.
enter, and then there's 6, 7, 8 listings that they'll show you right away, and then the
Yep.
star listings right
See the
below them.
stars.
And the first,
Yep.
I mean, if that first one, no matter how much they paid for
Yep.
the advertising or the promotion, if that first one has 2.5 stars out of 5, you're probably
Yep.
going, I'll skip that one.
Next
Hey,
one.
look at this one.
Definitely.
And then the other part is, oftentimes that gets owned by marketing. And we
Yeah.
talk about that a lot. Marketing owns that, and they analyze it, and they bring it in. They tell people our reviews are bad, and then they try to do things to pump up reviews. I mean, I've seen businesses say, "Oh, hey, we'll buy you a cup of coffee if you give us a good review for your
Yep.
tire purchase," that kind of thing. People forget to respond to the reviews, and that's
Definitely.
another one of those areas where, I mean, from a customer experience perspective, when we talk about responding to the data that we get in, that's data that you're getting in. You need to respond to it. You need to go on there. Don't put a templated response of your review and global warming are the most important issues in our company right now.
Right. Yeah.
You got to go in there and say, we have a heartfelt apology for you. And if you want to, say it, please call me. My number is Dave. I'm the manager. Call me. You know how much of an impact that would make if someone sees a 1-star review, but then immediately below it, they see the manager saying, hey, please call me. We'll fix this and make it right. It
Absolutely.
almost negates that whole 1-star review.
100%. I think I know for some of the organizations that we work with at CXC, one of the biggest recommendations we make when we get to this feedback piece is really around okay, promoters, and for people that are going out of their way to leave you an incredible review, promoters, they better minimally get a thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
Minimally a thank you, or minimally a thank you so much for taking the time to leave the feedback. Better yet, thank you for giving us this incredible feedback. That's that's awesome.
Yeah.
Your passives and your detractors, I love that you bring this up and you call this out right now. Guys, somebody better be escalating that. Like your neutrals and your passives, or sorry, your detractors, those are people that they went out of their time to kind of tell you, yeah, you're all right, or worst case, you suck. You're not good. Like
Yeah.
this is not okay. I had a bad experience, etc. Those people are that's one of the easiest ways where you have somebody on staff, somebody on the team immediately following up. That's a huge opportunity. I like what you said too, Ken, where it's showing the public recognition of this stuff too. I know that I'm a CX nerd, so this is probably why I look at some of this feedback very differently than others. But I'm literally looking for responsiveness, meaning I'm looking for, and you can kind of see through what's automated versus what's human based. But I'm looking to see whether or not they understand some of those other basic rules of responding and thanking and circling back, closing the loop. If there's a call to action in a piece of feedback, someone's got to close the loop, even if it's a promoter or a detractor, right? So I love that you're kind of calling some of this stuff right out of the gates. Ken, I'd love to jump into the first pillar of team. Can you spend a couple minutes kind of talking about your team at QuestionPro and kind of give us a sense for the lay of the land in terms of what types of different teams or departments or roles that you personally get to work with every single solitary day, and give us a sense for some of the ways that you've had to kind of think about managing a team, leading a team, optimizing a team at all the different companies that you've been a part of.
Well, and it's very exciting for me at QuestionPro because I manage all the teams, which is, it's fun. I'm working in the CX group. I mean, we of course have our market research team. We also have our employee experience team, and they have their teams. And it's exciting and it's fun because it's what I preach, in that everyone has a role in customer experience, and then everyone has a role in QuestionPro customer experience. So
Yeah, right.
I get to, I'm leading the marketing, I'm leading the product development, which is exciting for me because, now we're building things, shall I say, in my image, which, some people would say that's a bad idea. But I love, I have a great team around me that contributes to it. So I've always been a little more technical, so I can jump in with the developers on some evenings and say, hey, let's find a hack for this. Let's solve
Yeah.
this one customer's problem. And it's that full cycle. So I'm very fortunate now that I'm working with marketing, sales, client management, account management, and the product development teams. And it's a lot of fun to pull that together. And I think one of the most meaningful things You always say you should like to brag a little when your boss does something that, you've been preaching for a while.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
saw an email, it was yesterday or the day before, he sent out an email and he basically said, everyone is accountable for our client retention.
Love it.
And he said, even, if you think you're just a developer and you're in the back end, no, you're developing a feature, you're developing a tool. And if you develop it wrong, by the way, they'll have a complaint, someone will be
Absolutely.
submitting a ticket. And so having a team like that is just amazing. And I've worked with some big teams, and my prior role at Ipsos, such a vast organization. I managed 6 departments, I think 32 functional areas.
Wow,
That's a huge team.
that's a
But
lot.
I will admittedly say sometimes they didn't all work together, even though they all reported up one direction.
Totally.
Um,
Okay.
they didn't all work together, and that's something you can actually I can actually see the difference in how our clients respond. And
Yep.
I had some great clients in my prior role, didn't have tons of complaints. At the
Yep.
same time, they weren't going out like my clients are nowadays and going, if you haven't used QuestionPro, you should really use them. And
Yeah.
it's that big difference between the promoters, passives, and detractors. I've never had a ton of detractors. You always have some, but they were sitting in that passive category. So with the teams working together the way they do now, all of our clients are promoters. All of them are
That's
sitting out there
awesome.
going, this is a great team to work with. And it's great to have that kind of feeling working in a team like that.
It 100% is, man. The majority of us spend the bulk of our time at work with our teammates and with our coworkers instead of our friends and our family. I know I say it all the time, but it's true. And when you're at a company where you've got the majority of your customer base or your customer portfolio in a promoter state, man, it's fun because, like, number
Oh,
one, it's less of the negative stuff. Number two, it's less of maybe some of the more fueled, passionate customer engagements and activities that many of our listeners probably are managing on a daily basis when you're dealing with a lot of detractors. But the other piece is this, man. It's like there's a tendency in the CX and the CS space to really kind of focus on some of the bad, right? Like
yeah.
you almost want to extract all the detractor and the passive data for the month and just kick it up the ladder to how bad everything is, how how you need to fix this and that product sucks and this process isn't good and that team's unresponsive and all those things. But the reality is like we need more CX and CS leaders, more future customer focused business leaders. Think about the wins, man, celebrating the wins, talking about what the promoters are talking about. Because again, like as I've gotten deeper into my CX and CS career, Ken, and as we've worked with more and more customers around how to think about building an incredible customer experience, man, doubling down on your wins, sharing the good stuff that all of these existing customers are already loving about your business or loving about your product. It's fuel for fire, number one. And then number two, on the EX side of the game, people
Exactly.
love working with customers that are pumped. Like it's hard working with the customer base where you got a really bad NPS, you got a really bad CSAT rate, and everything's negative, and every day you're showing up, and it's like, oh my god, we're gonna talk more about the same 3 things that we've already known about. And so I'm just trying to call out that there's something about the CX and the EX piece here together, Ken, where it's like that makes a big difference for building a company that's kind of really poised for success in the future and poised to have an incredible team of employees that are going to stick around. They're going to get promoted. They're going to come up with the next 10 different revenue lines for your business, and they're going to keep growing the business, right? They're going to keep putting you in a position to win and to find new things that you can help your customers with every single solitary day.
Yeah, and I remember when I first got in the industry, the model was the service profit chain, and it had, oh well, you have the product, you have the people, you have the service people are providing, and then the customer, and that whole, and the reality is, back in 2004, 2005, I was working with one client, a retailer that had the EX and the CX with us. And they said there's no relationship. We're just running correlations. I'm like, well, you're running the wrong correlations, first of all. Start looking at, first, they were a retail store. So they had these mega stores where, they were crazy busy, things like that. And then they had these smaller, can't call them boutique shops. They were still pretty big stores, but they were the
Sure.
smaller, low volume. And, as soon as you started, like, let's split those variables out, there were a couple of things that popped out right away. The
Yep.
stores that had the most delighted customers, and I mean delighted, I'm not talking promoters, I'm talking top point on the
Yeah.
scale,
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
the most delighted employees.
Yep.
And, was it we definitely know it's correlation. What was the causation? Well, I think it feeds into itself. It's a cycle. I mean,
Yep.
you get the delighted customers, they're happy to be there, they have fewer complaints, and then the employees are happy. And
Yep.
and then they can focus on, I mean, it's one of the things I say, even in my business, I can focus on innovation now instead of fixing problems. Like if you have a bunch of software bugs, it's like you're focused on fixing problems, eliminating distractors. Now we have happy customers. And even if those customers come back and say, it'd be really great if we don't view it as a complaint. It's a delighted customer that's helping us innovate. And your customers can do that for you too. They're more than happy to tell you, your business would be better if you did this. I remember, years and years ago when I was still with that retailer, they said, why don't you have coffee shops in your stores? Now, every store has a coffee shop.
That's 100%. Yep. I love that. Ken, I'd love to jump into the second CX pillar of tools, man. So number one, QuestionPro has just got a plethora of different incredible tools that your customers can utilize and really can help to transform their business and transform their customer experiences and their employee experiences too, by the way. But I'd love for you to spend a couple minutes kind of talking about how you've sort of approached thinking about, number one, how to build a tech stack, and number two, what tools to invest in as you're growing and scaling a business and a team. I know this is one of the biggest challenges that many CX and CSers out there struggle with. What tools do I need? What tools can I afford? What tools do I need to put in front of my team to make sure that I'm going to get the biggest bang for my buck and I'm going to get the highest level of output? I'd love for you to spend a few minutes kind of talking about some of the things you've learned along your own personal journey around how to think about the tool piece and the tech stack management piece.
Yeah, and of course I come from that background where a spreadsheet was more than enough to get me through and make my decisions. So it's amazing how much I've evolved in that sense. I have a demo where I show it's jokingly, we show scores for the employees, and when you click on the employee, it brings up 3 different scores, and one's the empathy score, and mine is always in red. And even though it's a demo, everyone says, "Oh, that's so true. He really needs to work on that." But it is one of those that when you think about the tools that you need, when I started, it was, I just need to measure something. I need measure and I need outputs. But it really is, that was very central looking. That was very looking at myself. It's beyond that now. I mean, we talked about customer journey mapping. You need something that you can work on. And sad to say, I mean, there's a lot of, a lot of people out there that will say, I'm going to put up a big poster and I'm going to put Post-it notes on there. And guess what? It's going to get lost. It's going to get crumpled, whatever. You actually need a technology that supports that. And I would have, if you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I'd like, nope, you just need a piece of paper with the Post-it notes. But nowadays, as big as organizations are, and let's face it, you're working from home today, I'm working from home today,
100%.
we need something that we can log into and we can add on to it. And preferably one that you can start linking back to your touch points, whether it's an internal KPI or an external KPI. And so, having that way to manage the journey or think about the journey or bring awareness to the journey to all the people is huge as a starting point. I mean, whether you're talking CX or just business in general, like, do you know what your customers are going through? So even, I worked with one shipping company. They had a customer journey map just about the IVR system.
Wow.
Granted, a little complex IVR system.
Yeah.
And the whole goal was to make sure they don't talk to a rep, which I sort of didn't like. But at the same time, they had an entire journey map around, where you'll get to, where you'll point at when they do this, or if they're looking for that, what they should be offering and what should be offered first as a menu item, all that. I mean, like, it's amazing how much they thought about that particular piece. So you need to have that. I think the second part is you need to have measurements. And I'll say I'm from a operational background. If you can't measure it, you can't change it. And I'm not just talking about CX scores and surveys. I mentioned reviews. That's all that also in there. If you can't measure how you're doing there and bring it in. And then even on the business side of things, I mean, why would you not tell your employees how you're doing in sales?
Yeah, totally.
Let them know. Have a tool where, when they have that moment and they're thinking, how can I help this company more? Give them the tools to be able to say, I know where we are in sales. And, we have a tool that we recently acquired called Suite CX, where you can actually look at that journey map and actually
Nice.
pull those numbers in there. And that, that's great for an employee if they understand the journey, and that not everyone has that, but at least give them something where they know how the business is doing, how they are doing, how the company views them, some of the initiatives that the company are going to do. So when you're talking an ERP, you're talking employee experience measurement. I mean, I know I'm going through a lot of things here, but the reality is, if you want to be successful in today's business world, you need all of these things just to be successful on the CX side of things, believe it or
Big
not.
time.
That's,
Yep.
I mean, that all I'm talking about is being successful for CX. You still have to have a good product, something that people want and willing to pay for. So,
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
that's a whole other side that I'm not even addressing here, but all of these tools really need to be integrated, and then pull in the right tool. I'll speak, to myself. I mean, we are a customer experience measurement platform. We base our measurement on touch points. We want you to measure various touch points. We don't want you to put 60, 70 question surveys together that you're sending out to every
likes those,
time that you
Ken.
stay in a hotel, that kind of thing, or every
Nobody
time
likes those.
nobody likes those. You can have a once a year relationship survey, and I'll say maybe 30 questions. But
Sure.
everything else should be just, how did we do? And so that you can actually assess those touch points. And if that's not where your business is, if you're not ready for that, we're not the right tool for you. I'll
Yep.
just say that. Make
Yep.
sure you're getting the right tool for your needs. And I've seen businesses that said, they've gone with one of our competitors where they say, we just need to measure this one touch point because 90% of our customers go through this touch point. We need to measure it, assess it, and that's all we're doing. And then it turns into, well, we need to add a few more questions to it. And suddenly the transaction becomes, huge, but they want to measure, assess. If it's a negative feedback, they want to be able to respond to it. That's what one of our competitors, if that's where you're at, great. You're not as far along on the maturity scale, but that's the tool that you're going to need. And so being able to assess those tools in an upfront way, it doesn't come from a spreadsheet, by the way. I love when you get those spreadsheets, like, do you do this? Do you do this? You're not going to be able to assess it. Just ask someone, like, how do you use it? And this, I will freely admit that you use ours if you want to measure touch points. So being able to look at those tools and get the right tools. I know Salesforce was like the talk of the town for like 15, 20 years.
Definitely.
Not every tiny business needs Salesforce. Sometimes they just,
100% agree with you.
I've seen companies do very well just getting HubSpot marketing and HubSpot sales and says, that's
Absolutely.
our CRM, and we're going to operate like that. So when you look at the tools, don't try and buy a tool through a spreadsheet.
Yep.
Buy it, buy it based on, this will fit my company. And it's tough to do sometimes. Sometimes you get those little purchasing departments that get in the way of all that. But, if you do your research and if you go look at the reviews, then you'll know what the right tools to really bring your CX, I call it mature CX, as most of us do, but that's what you're looking to do. If you're just starting out, or if you want mature CX, the tools are not just a CX platform.
Yep. I love that, Ken. Super awesome ideas there. Ken, I want to jump into the third CX pillar process, because you already started to kind of lay some of this groundwork, but we've talked about the team, we've talked about the tool side. Process, a lot of guests on the CXCP, they refer to the process as like the glue, or like the stickiness that keeps all this stuff together. I'd love to kind of hear how you think about process, and let me expand on it. So, like, at a company, the QuestionPro, right? You're working with, 2.5 million different users across 40 countries. There's all sorts of different types of companies, all sorts of different types of use cases. How do you and your team, or how have you and your team kind of unpack that third pillar of process? So, like, standard operating procedures, living playbooks, FAQs, community sets, where you could theoretically leverage the 2.5 million users to give some good gold or some good calls to action around how to do something, how to fix something. I'd love for you to spend a couple minutes talking about some of the things that you and the team have really kind of thought about with wrangling process as QuestionPro has scaled and grown into the future.
Yeah, and I think the first part is recognition, and you alluded to it a little bit. I will say in my career, I've probably implemented thousands of programs, and there have been no two that are alike. I remember one, one of my roles, they said, let's just build a CX platform that can encompass everyone and everything. And, it's, you have a standard questionnaire and you have standard outputs and I'm like, there is no one and nothing like that. They rolled it out. They got a few, because it was a lower cost. They got a few hotel chains on it. And then it was like, oh, it doesn't really fit for our growth. So,
Yep.
the
Yep.
process has to be first recognizing, that each client will be different. And as soon as you recognize that, then you can start to put together that thinking behind, first make sure it's the right fit. And I've had to, walk a contract back that a sales rep has, offered and say, I'm sorry, we are not the right fit for you for what you're doing.
Yep.
So, make sure it's, the tools that you're putting together are the right fit. And then again, because we're sort of, talking about the touch points in the journey, let's do that inventory. When we talk about the process, we start with the inventory. What do you want to measure? What do you think we should be measuring? And what are you leaving out on purpose and why? Like
Yep.
sometimes you'll find, oh, well, we're not measuring, our drive-through satisfaction because we're terrible. Like, well, that's a bad reason. But it's
That's not
always
the
good.
best reason to avoid measuring it, right?
Yeah, we want the scores to be higher, so we're not going to measure that touch point. It's like, yeah, that you're not improving. And then from there, it really becomes a lot easier because we think about the deployment in that touch point approach. And I mean, it's amazing how many clients come back and say, oh, well, you've made this so easy. We have one that's rolling out 28 surveys, but it felt to them like, hey, this just rolled out really smoothly.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
it's because
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we're bringing them together. We're looking at the ways we can link them together, and we're looking at the ways we can report them together. And so as soon as you get past those first two big humps of recognizing that each client is different, and even though I say it every time, I still go, oh, it's like this client.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
still do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then being able to then say, what do you measure? What do you want to measure? What do you don't want to measure? And what should we be measuring? And asking those three questions. And it's great because everyone can get behind it and start now. Now we can go through our standard process of setting up surveys, setting up the deployments, setting up the data feeds, setting up the closed loop feedback, and boom, it's done. But those first two steps are so important, and if you pass them over, you're in for the next 6 months of, shall I say, not always a dissatisfied client, but I call them the growing pains. when
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
that client that you haven't quite, because you haven't quite gotten their goals and your goals aligned, essentially.
Yeah. It's look, the reality is there's a ton of companies out there that are killing it, that when you look at their customer portfolio, they wonder why, and I'm just going to generically kind of use like a green, yellow, red type of explanation
Yeah.
here. Like, you got a ton of customers in the yellow, and the yellow might not be bad, right? Because they're still paying and they're still using, and there's still all these signals that show things are okay. But yellow's not green, right? Green is great. Green is awesome. Green is upsell, cross sell, expansion sell, like partnership, right? You're a partner. Yellow is like, I don't know, man. Like, we're dating, and I'll keep showing up to more dates, but like, I'm not
Yellow's go
married.
get married.
Right. And then the other thing is this, let's call it what it is. And this is the CX and the CS nerd in me. The migration pattern of cohorts that come from the yellow and move into the red are typically, that's what you're looking at, guys, right? Where simpler way of thinking it is like, the more yellows you got in your portfolio, there's more opportunity for migration to the red side. Once you get to the red side, now you've already proven and validated there's leading indications for churn, or for maybe thinking about one of your competitors, or just thinking about maybe they validated they don't need this thing at all, right? And it's not about you, it's not about the competitors, but they've just validated the time to value and the return for the value. It's just not high enough to make the investment, right? So all awesome ideas here, Ken. Ken, I want to dive into the fourth and the final CX pillar of feedback. And obviously you're an expert at feedback. QuestionPro is an expert, leading solution on feedback. Let's break this into two parts. I would love to hear you kind of think about some of the things that have worked really, really well for you in your career around collecting and acting upon customer feedback, and then definitely spend a minute or two talking about some of the teams that you've led, man, and especially, and if you want to keep it about art specifically, some of the things that you guys are doing at QuestionPro. Love to kind of hear you think about employee feedback as well.
Yeah, and I think the feedback tools, I mean, long life lesson. I mean, when I jumped in, to the industry a few years later. Reichheld wrote the ultimate question, the only question you need to ask on, and it's funny because he said all you need is this question and this open end, and people jumped on board, and I completely understand why. It's simple. It's I like to call it an unbiased. It's sort of a standardized, I guess, really view across the organization, so you can ask that same question on different touch points and say, this, how would you recommend us? And it wasn't really intended for transactional, but it turned into that. So you sort of learn and adapt. And, at the time we sort of was, our organization at the time was like, no, we don't do this NPS stuff. We don't believe in it. And so you've sort of, it's evolved and evolved and evolved. And what we found through research is it doesn't matter what your overall KPI is. You can say it's NPS, customer effort score. You can say it's CSAT. You can say it's any one of these scores. What matters is that you're doing better than your competition, ultimately, in the eyes of that individual customer. So when you were talking about the green, yellow, red, that's exactly where we sort of landed. When I came to QuestionPro and I was thinking about, how do we differentiate what we're measuring and how we're getting the feedback? And it came down to that exact fact. We built a question type called NPS Plus, where, despite, with NPS, you have that closed end, we have that open end. All the open end feedback that we're getting is sort of like, even with sentiment analysis, it's like, plus, it's like, it's grouping it, but you're really not able to sort of fill in the gaps really. And so you end up asking now these attribute questions, so we can do a driver analysis, so we can say what's most important based on a derived analysis. So what we added in between was a root cause, and it's interesting because you talked about green, yellow, red. Green, they're your advocates. They're the ones that say they would recommend you. They're the 9 or 10. So we have one set of root causes for the 9s and 10s, the greens, as we would call them, and then another set of root causes for anything below that, the yellows and reds. And everyone keeps saying, like, why don't we have a different group for yellow and a different group for red? And it's quite simple. Those ones see some area where you can have improvement.
Absolutely.
And so now when we have the root causes and we start looking across the organization at root causes, you can see what's making people happy across the organization and where the opportunities are for improvement. And since we've started doing this, it's amazing. It was like sort of, I talked about it a lot for a couple of years, and now I have clients like going out and telling other clients like, oh, you should use this. And, the other day someone said, oh, I found it in one of our competitors' survey now. So one of our competing organizations has suddenly said, oh, well, this is, this makes enough of an impact that they've tried to copy it. They haven't quite done it, but, and we always, you were talking about the yellow and red. We're able to look at that in the root cause and say, okay, here's some immediate areas for improvement without asking a battery of attributes. Here's some immediate areas of improvement because they stand out in a little chart. What root causes stand out? And customers will tell you what stands out. We keep trying to play psychology and use analysis, and no, customer will tell you. And then when they give that open end, we actually can let them we have a tool that lets them vote on other customers' open ends, so they can go, oh yeah, no, what they said. And it's not going to work in banking, but we work with a lot of sports franchises, and it worked great there. Fans saying, hey, bring back this mascot. It was so cool when we saw the little kid mascot, things like that, so those things, pop out in these innovation things. But the last part that we added to it was this churn risk. And, if you're a detractor, you're a churn risk. But like exactly what you were saying, passives can be a churn risk too. If you're having a problem with a payment system example we used before, and it keeps popping up, that passive is going to go to a detractor eventually. Maybe not this time, maybe not next time, but eventually. So
100%.
And then the second part that you talked about, working with some of the teams. I mean, I just brought one up. We worked with the National Independent Soccer Association, and that was such a fun collaboration, and very happy with us and what we're doing. And we're measuring their fan feedback, and one of the things they had us do is we innovated and we actually increased fan engagement. You know how soccer matches are. You go 45 minutes without a commercial, and
I'm a soccer fan, Ken. My dad came from Italy, so I grew up watching soccer. But you're right. Sometimes you got a 90-minute match, you're waiting for the one point of activity that changes the whole event, right? That's what it is.
Exactly. And so what we did is we QR codes became popular during COVID. Their broadcasts actually flash up QR codes, and in the stadium they do it so fans can vote on things.
That's
At the
cool.
beginning of the match, they were voting on who they think they would win.
Nice.
And during the middle of the match, who do you think will score the first goal? Which team? And so
That's really cool.
we're throwing some interactivity. What was cool about that is we were capturing their email address. So the first thing they do is enter their email address so we don't get duplicates, and we could follow up with them. And at the end of the
That's
season,
awesome.
when we followed up with them, I have never seen this happen where we followed up and we sent them this, sizable relationship survey. And at the comments that they were providing in our NPS Plus, and it was the third most upvoted comment is, I'd like the opportunity to participate in more of these fan polls.
That's really cool.
They want to participate in more research because we made it engaging. So I love working with teams like that. I mean, it's a team of teams, so it's appropriate. But we're very fortunate to get to work with some really great groups like that.
Ken, that's awesome. It's almost like we're in the super interesting world, not just in the CX and the CS space, man. Like, we're in this interesting world where the democratization of data, the democratization of feedback and polling and what people think, it's at our fingertips. An awesome example where like people, and especially people, if people can jam on an answer right now and then see the results, forget about it. You're going to get really high engagement rates. People would love to kind of get 3-4 different options or 3 things that you're thinking about right now, and then you can zap your answers in and then see what the poll just thought. People love that stuff. That's like it's involvement, it's engagement, it's education. You're kind of learning what a sample thinks really quickly, right? Which is not just CX and CS nerds that like that. People are interested in that stuff, man. People want to see what the crowd thinks, right? So I love it. Ken, this has been an absolute pleasure. Before we wrap up the show, where can people find out, number one, more about QuestionPro, and then where can people get in touch with you and your team, sir? So if they do want to learn more about QuestionPro, they know where to find you folks. Yeah,
it's actually very easy. First of all, you can learn more about QuestionPro at www.questionpro.com easily.
Okay.
And then if you want to get in touch with me, just add that /Ken on it, and you can actually connect right with me right there. You can actually click meet now or schedule time with me. So very easy to get a hold of me. And of course, you can find me at LinkedIn at LinkedIn/Ken Peterson. So
I love it. Well, Ken, look, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining the CX Chronicles podcast, sharing your story, talking about the incredible things you guys are working on at QuestionPro. I will look forward to keeping in touch with you moving forward, man. And again, thank you so much for chatting with the CX Nation today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.